The studio lights came up as they always did, warm and steady, illuminating the familiar set that had hosted countless mornings. The audience clapped, the music faded, and the cameras rolled with all the practiced rhythm of a live show. From the outside, everything looked routine, predictable. But inside, there was a subtle difference in the energy, a quiet shift that didn't announce itself with fanfare. It was in the way the air seemed a little heavier, softer, as though the room itself was sensing a moment that didn't fit neatly into the usual schedule. No one spoke yet, and yet everyone felt it. A stillness before honesty, a pause before truth. The smile that carried stories. Kelly stepped onto the set with the familiar, warm smile viewers had come to know over the years, the kind that usually radiates confidence and sets a tone for the morning. But this time, there was something more layered beneath it, a trace of thoughtfulness, a slight reddening around her eyes, the way she blinked as if giving herself a moment to gather her center. Mark matched her pace beside her, greeting the audience with his usual warmth, but there was a gentle gravity to his tone, a soft steadiness that seemed to mirror her own. They sat together behind the desk, and instead of the usual banter, there was a pause, long enough to make people at home lean in, sensing the sincerity waiting to be spoken aloud. When silence speaks. The quiet stretched across the studio, neither forced nor uncomfortable, but filled with an honesty that the audience couldn't ignore. Kelly's hands rested lightly in her lap, fingers gently intertwined, grounding her in the moment. She took a steadying breath, the microphone capturing the subtle intake, and then looked up with a calm that carried the weight of experience. "Good morning," she began softly, pausing as the words found their way. "Today isn't going to feel like a typical show." It was simple, gentle, and yet it held a profound truth. This was a moment that would not follow the usual script, a moment built from reflection rather than routine. Speaking beyond the set, Kelly's gaze traveled beyond the cameras, beyond the audience, as if she were speaking directly to the millions who had welcomed her into their mornings for decades. She reflected on time, on how quietly it moves, reshaping life in ways we don't always anticipate. She spoke about gratitude, about growing up under the public eye, about learning who she truly was while the world watched. These weren't announcements or confessions. They were reflections, offered without embellishment. The words were ordinary, yet they carried extraordinary weight because they were real, unfiltered, and deeply human. Choosing to be unscripted. There was no script behind her words, no teleprompter prompting carefully polished phrasing. What viewers were hearing was thoughts spoken aloud for the first time, a decision to show herself as she truly felt. Kelly acknowledged the years of routine, the pressure to always perform, and the delicate balance between public expectation and private self. She shared how easy it is to lose sight of who you are when your life becomes a cycle of repetition. The room listened not as an audience, but as witnesses to an authentic moment, one that required no embellishment because it resonated so fully on its own. A steady presence. Through it all, Mark remained quietly attentive, his presence a subtle anchor. He didn't interrupt, didn't speak over the moment, but offered reassurance through his calm demeanor. When she paused, he waited. When her voice trembled, he leaned in gently, silently signaling support. At one point, his hand rested near hers on the desk, a small grounding gesture that conveyed companionship and care. Viewers noticed instantly. Words weren't necessary. The shared understanding between them filled the room with a warmth that was both comforting and profound. Reflections on change. Kelly's reflections weren't dramatic. They were meditative, even tender. She spoke about the life she had built and how, over time, even beloved routines can feel different. She explored the idea that loving something deeply doesn't mean it must remain forever unchanged, and that growth can coexist with gratitude. Her words weren't about endings or departures. They were about evolution, about recognizing the natural shifts that happen in every life. The honesty of her reflections created a quiet resonance, allowing the audience to see themselves within her experience. The rhythm of routine? She described mornings that begin before dawn, the comforting rhythm of segments and schedules, and the subtle cost of repetition. There was no resentment in her voice, only awareness, a recognition that life can sometimes feel boxed in by expectation. She spoke of wanting to experience moments differently, to slow down, to savor coffee without counting the minutes, to simply exist without performing. These small desires, shared openly, carried a powerful message. It's okay to pause, to reflect, and to honor your own needs without guilt. A universal connection. What touched people most wasn't her role or her platform. It was the honesty behind her words. Anyone who has ever stayed too long in a role, a relationship, or a rhythm that once brought joy recognized themselves in her reflections. Anyone who has ever wrestled with change or guilt found themselves seen. Kelly wasn't stepping away from gratitude. She was standing fully inside it, acknowledging that even the chapters we cherish evolve over time, and that evolution is a natural, beautiful part of life. Remembering the journey, behind her, images flashed on the screen, not a dramatic montage, but a gentle celebration of time lived fully. Moments of laughter, interviews, and connection with viewers filled the space. Kelly watched quietly, a small, genuine smile breaking through her emotion. "I don't regret any of it," she said softly, and her sincerity resonated. The memories weren't nostalgia. They were reminders of experiences embraced with intention, of the depth that comes from living fully in each moment, and of the courage required to continue forward. Honestly. Courage over comfort. Mark finally spoke, not to shift focus, but to honor the space Kelly had created. He acknowledged her bravery, emphasizing that courage isn't measured in achievement, but in honesty and self-awareness. Growth, he reminded everyone, doesn't always follow a clear plan, and stepping into uncertainty is not failure. Kelly's gentle laughter punctuated the moment, the kind that comes from acknowledging fear and moving forward anyway. Fear, she said, doesn't mean the path is wrong. It often signals authenticity, a willingness to honor yourself amidst change. Gratitude, spoken aloud. She made a point to clarify that this moment wasn't a farewell or a conclusion, but an expression of gratitude spoken openly. She thanked viewers for their patience, loyalty, and presence, especially on days when she felt the weight of expectation most keenly. Her appreciation was layered, tender, and genuine. It wasn't performative. It wasn't meant to elicit applause. It was an acknowledgement of shared time and shared trust, a recognition that connections forged over years are worthy of being honored while they continue. The audience that felt seen. The applause that followed wasn't loud or showy. It was steady, respectful, and full of understanding. People didn't rise because they were instructed. They rose because they felt included in something honest and real. Kelly's hand went to her heart, her eyes glistening, and Mark's gentle squeeze reminded viewers that support is often quiet, consistent, and profoundly human. The moment lingered, not because it was dramatic, but because it was lived truthfully, shared generously, and experienced collectively. The message that remains. Before the segment transitioned, Kelly leaned slightly forward, closing the distance between herself and the camera. She spoke about identity, about how roles are experiences rather than definitions of self. She reminded viewers that it's acceptable to choose change, to pause, to rest, and to honor personal growth without erasing what came before. Her calm tone and steady gaze made the message resonate. Change is not failure, reflection is not weakness, and honoring oneself is an act of courage. Moving forward with intention. As the cameras pulled back, there was no dramatic exit, no finality, no tearful goodbye. Instead, there was quiet acknowledgement, the kind that grows stronger in memory. Whatever comes next would be built on the foundation of what had already been lived, not as escape, but as evolution. The moment itself was a reminder that the transitions in life can be gentle, respectful, and filled with gratitude. Viewers were left with the understanding that growth, honesty, and reflection have their own rhythm, and that sometimes the simplest moments carry the deepest meaning. Life beyond the spotlight. When the lights faded and the broadcast ended, what lingered wasn't speculation or headline-worthy drama. It was recognition, a recognition that routines, even those deeply cherished, can shift, and that gratitude and growth can coexist. Honesty, vulnerability, and self-reflection leave impressions far longer than any scripted words. Life continues. Yes, but moments like these leave an imprint, quietly reminding everyone watching that embracing change is not only necessary, it is beautiful. The lasting impression. This wasn't a performance. It wasn't a farewell. It was a pause, a breath, a shared human experience between people who had spent years in front of cameras and those who had invited them into their mornings. The moment affirmed that lives are meant to be lived authentically, that routines are flexible, and that gratitude can coexist with desire for growth. Kelly's openness reminded viewers that life is allowed to evolve gently, that honesty can bridge distance, and that true connection comes from showing up fully, without pretense and without fear.